It's taken me a lifetime to try to work out what the Cyprus question entails. But for the last 3 or 4 years, I've tried to enter into a separate quagmire, the Scottish question. And I just hope I'm not going to go mad. My objective today is quite straightforward. It is to explain why the Cyprus question has an echo in the Scottish question, and why the Republic of Cyprus and its diaspora ought to take an active interest in the Scottish question. My initial views were set out in this article, which was published in the Cyprus Weekly in May 2011. And since then I've repeated my views in a number of fora, including a lecture given in the for the University of Cyprus public lecture series in London in November 2012. Before I move on, could I ask if there is anybody here representing the government of the Republic of Cyprus? No. My article of November of, when was it? May 2011 was ignored by the government of the Republic of Cyprus. When I gave my lecture in London, nobody came from the Cyprus High Commission, and I can see here today that there's nobody from the Cyprus government. And that rather tells us something perhaps as to how my views are considered by the Cyprus government. So I'm going to have another go, and hopefully if you have any connections in the Cyprus government, and as I understand you have to have MESA to succeed in government here, please convey my message to them. Can I ask, has the Scottish question been subject to any serious debate or discussion on RIC or on any of the other broadcasting stations here in Cyprus? No? I know they're interested in the elections, but last year, no? Any
problems on this planet?
I take that as a no. Is that correct? Well, let me demonstrate to you why the Cyprus question is connected to Scotland, and why the Republic of Cyprus ought to take an active interest. I would even go as far as to suggest that the Republic of Cyprus should consider sending a special envoy to the United Kingdom to oversee the Scottish question. That idea I put last year. The Republic of Cyprus has clearly ignored me. Remember, the United Kingdom has spent the last 140 years or so poking its noses into the affairs of the island of Cyprus. And in the run-up to the Annan Plan, Mr. Blair, the then British Prime Minister, told the voters here to vote yes. He also sent Mr. Hannay, or rather Lord Hannay, to act as the special representative. There are United Nations peacekeeping forces on the buffer zone who are British. And I'm not saying that the Republic of Cyprus should send a contingent from the National Guard to Hadrian's Wall. But what I am saying is that the Republic of Cyprus ought to take the Scottish question seriously. Let me now explain to you why. There are two reasons, among others, but there are two core reasons why Cyprus and Scotland are connected. One is to do with the process relating to the Scottish referendum procedure, and the other is to do with matters of substance. Process and substance. And I will now explore those two themes in a little bit more detail. At the very outset, I must acknowledge that there are profound differences between Scotland and Cyprus. The Scots were once an independent state, and at the beginning of the 18th century they chose to integrate themselves into England and form the United Kingdom. The Scottish population is a lawful population. It does not consist of unlawful settlers brought over from Turkey, nor does it consist of a contingent of foreign military forces. The history of Scotland is therefore markedly different to the history of Cyprus, and the legal status of Scotland is completely different to that of the occupied north. The occupied north is occupied by Turkey, contrary to international law. Scotland is a constitutional part of the United Kingdom. Could I just take my glass of water? I forgot to bring it up to the... Forgive me. Thank you. So, at the very outset, let me make it absolutely clear that there are profound differences. Having said that, let's now move on to consider the parallels. I want to first of all focus on the process and consider how the United Kingdom has come to the brink of being partitioned into two segments through what would be an act of secession by Scotland, although it could be other things as well. So that's one of the things that's being considered at the moment. Well, the history of this begins in the early 18th century with the Acts of Union, 1706 and 1707, when the then independent Scotland became part of the United Kingdom. And since then, the executive and legislative branches of the United Kingdom in London have controlled and governed Scotland. Scotland retained its own judiciary and legal profession, and its own football team, as we know, but Scotland was ruled by London. And over the last 100 years or so, the Scottish nationalist movement has grown in significance, and a Scottish secessionist movement crystallised around the Scottish National Party. And the Scottish National Party has been calling for the self-determination of the Scottish people and the secession of Scotland from the United Kingdom. The Blair government of the 1997 to 2007 period decided to appease the Scottish nationalist movement by introducing devolution. This is a form of constitutional government which stops short of federation but involves the transfer of power in certain designated fields from the central government, i.e. from London, to Edinburgh. So we had the 1998 Scotland Act. It was part of the constitutional reforms introduced by Prime Minister Blair as soon as he came to power, which dovetailed chronologically with the Northern Ireland peace process we've just heard about. The Northern Ireland Act also dates back to 1998, as do other profound constitutional measures, including the Human Rights Act. Mr. Blair, before his mind was diverted by Iraq and President Bush, embarked upon arguably the most profound era of constitutional reform in British history, at least since the 17th century. We have the Freedom of Information Act as another product of that era, as is the devolution arrangements set up in Wales. Now, Alex Salmond is the Alex Salmond is the leader of the Scottish National Party. He's one of the most astute, self-confident, cunning, and successful politicians that the United Kingdom has ever produced. He managed to increase his popularity in Scotland in part by virtue of his dignified opposition to the conflict in Iraq. But he combines a mixture of socialism, populism, nationalism, and patriotism to advance his party's cause. And the Scotland Act 1998 was a product, it was a compromise, but it was a product of his party's campaigning. But more specifically, in May 2011, Alex Salmond managed to secure victory for the Scottish National Party in the Scottish elections to the Scottish Parliament, and that gave the Scottish National Party control not just of the Scottish Parliament, but of the Scottish Government. Now, if we can just rewind to what we were hearing about earlier, this is an example of what dangers arise when you transfer power from a central government to a local government. You can end up having the opposite of what you expect. When the Scotland Act was introduced in 1998, the hope was that this would suppress Scottish nationalism and maintain the Union, and it produced the exact opposite effect of producing a Scottish nationalist government that was elected via the Scottish Parliament on the basis of a pro-independence referendum. The United Kingdom government, that's the government in Westminster in London, or Whitehall in London, the United Kingdom government respected the outcome of the Scottish elections in May 2011. My article was written at that time. From the very beginning, the Scottish Secretary in the London government has said, from the very beginning, the British government recognised the political mandate that the Scottish National Party had secured for a referendum. And a process was put in place after the May 2011 elections by the Scottish Nationalist Party and the Scottish Nationalist-dominated government. The objective of the process was to ensure that a referendum was held in Scotland, but not in the remainder of the United Kingdom, with a view to Scotland voting on breaking away from the Union. Now that has implications, I'm going to just put a marker here, that has implications for whatever is being conducted in secret in Nicosia, if they are still conducting in secret in Nicosia. Because if a federation is to be set up, and I'm against the setting up a federation, but if a federation is to be set up, it should clarify clearly the circumstances under which any referenda may be held in the future. I'll come to Cyprus later, but I just want to put that marker down for the moment. So we're still on the question of process. The interesting point about the Scottish movement towards the referendum, which they hope will lead to a breakaway, is that it has been adopted in marked contrast to what occurred in the occupied area in 1983. In 1983, it was at 83, the Turkish Cypriot leadership exercised a unilateral declaration of independence, which was branded as illegal by the United Nations Security Council and by the whole world, with the exception of Turkey. As a consequence, the so-called TRNC remains nothing more than a puppet regime of Ankara, which remains the occupying power in the north. Alex Salmond learnt the lessons of that. He chose not to go along the path of making a unilateral declaration of independence. He chose the path of consensus and cooperation. And as Angus Robertson MP, the Scottish Nationalist Party Member of Parliament in the Westminster Parliament in London, has put it, Scotland's constitutional progress has been a model of democratic, peaceful and civic politics. And I suppose, even though Constantine and I disagree profoundly on the Cyprus question, it is a mark of the democracy, peacefulness and civility of the Republic that we can have a debate without throwing punches at one another, as might have occurred 50 years ago. But the Scots decided to go along the path of democracy, peace and civility, as well as law. And that brings me to the second feature of this process. As Angus Robertson put it, the United Kingdom government and the United Kingdom opposition party, Labour, have endorsed a legal, ordered and democratic path that can lead to Scotland becoming a sovereign state. So there are two aspects to this process adopted by Alex Salmond. The first has been to adopt a transparent, democratic, peaceful and civilised process. And on the other hand, the aim has been to ensure that the process is legal and constitutional, so that the referendum is covered in legality, and that the outcome of that process can be covered in legality. And as part of this process, Alex Salmond managed to negotiate an agreement with Prime Minister Cameron. So Mr. Cameron is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Alex Salmond is the First Minister of Scotland. And they've entered into what an outsider may consider to be an international agreement. It's not an international agreement, it's an agreement between the Prime Minister of a sovereign state, the United Kingdom, and the First Minister of an integral part of the United Kingdom that wishes to break away. This was the Edinburgh Agreement of the 15th of October 2012, and I've given you a copy which you should have in front of you. So if you have that in front of you, Appendix A, I've called it, it's Appendix A of a paper I've written but not yet published. It tells us something about the nature of this process. The United Kingdom government and the Scottish government have agreed to work together to ensure that a referendum on Scottish independence can take place. The governments are agreed that the referendum should have a clear legal base, be legislated for not by the Westminster government and Parliament, but by the Scottish Parliament through the transfer of fresh powers from London to Edinburgh, be conducted so as to command the confidence of parliaments, governments and peoples, deliver a fair test and decisive expression of the views of people in Scotland, and as a result that everyone will respect. I'll make one point here which is of profound relevance to Cyprus. Mr. Cameron's act of appeasement has resulted in Scotland having the right to vote unilaterally on whether they are going to break away from the rest of the United Kingdom. We in London and in England and in Wales and in Northern Ireland are not being given the right to vote in a referendum. What's even more bizarre is that a French citizen living in Edinburgh will have the right to vote in the Scottish referendum, but a Scottish British citizen living in London will not have the right to vote. And that point was made absolutely clear in the House of Commons a few days ago. I'll just read to you the extract. Mr. Freer, the MP for Finchley and Golders Green, where I have voted in the past, asked the Scottish Secretary, does my right honourable friend not agree that it is an anomaly that a Frenchman living in Edinburgh can vote on Scottish independence when a Scot living in London cannot do so? And the Scottish Secretary of the British government responded, I think that that is a reasonably easily understood anomaly. The French person, the EU national, who has made a commitment to living in Scotland, is entitled to vote in a referendum there, just as they would in the Scottish parliamentary elections. What's the impact of that for Cyprus? In 2004, Cyprus was outside the EU. Now Cyprus is in the EU. If there is a referendum in the future over the settlement of the Cyprus question, it's implicit in what's been happening in Scotland that European Union citizens living in the Republic of Cyprus would be eligible to vote. That, of course, brings me to another critique of what we've heard. How can we talk about two communities in Cyprus when there are, in fact, multiple communities in Cyprus? And are these details being considered in this ongoing deadlock in Nicosia? Because of the secrecy, we don't know. And that brings me to the other point that's set out in the Edinburgh Agreement. If you have a look midway down in the paragraph where it begins, it will then be for the Scottish Government to promote legislation. The second sentence says that the governments are agreed that the referendum should meet the highest standards of fairness, transparency and propriety, informed by consultation and independent expert advice. I just draw another connection here with Cyprus. How much transparency and consultation has there been in Nicosia in these interminable negotiations? And how many independent experts have been brought in to advise on, say, matters of constitutional law, maritime law, European Union law, public international law, military law, trade law? The list is endless. Let's now turn to the substance, if we may, and I'm conscious of the time, and I want to throw this open to discussion. I'll just make one last point, if I may, on the the process. And it's this, that and it flows from what I've just been saying, both the Scottish government in Edinburgh and the British government in London have instituted consultation exercises. They have both drawn upon and to some extent published the views of independent experts who've considered the various procedural and substantive questions that have been raised. And interestingly enough, the Advocate General for Scotland has published his views as to the legal position. The Advocate General for Scotland is the third law officer in the United Kingdom government. We have the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, and the Advocate General. There's also the Northern Ireland Attorney General, which I won't focus on today. So he's the equivalent of Mr. Klearchos in Nicosia, who's the Attorney General here. He is the legal advisor to the British government on constitutional and legal matters relating to Scotland. And he has published his views up to a point in a series of articles and lectures. Has Mr. Klearchos here in Nicosia published any views or given any lectures or identified the legal questions arising from the negotiations? Not Klearchos Klearchos, Mr. Bedros Klearchos, the Attorney General. I would be interested to know. So there are lessons to be drawn, ladies and gentlemen, from the process. There is clearly there are clearly lessons to be drawn, but there are also dangers to be drawn. And the danger to be drawn is, I wonder if there is a settlement, whether in the future a Turkish Cypriot nationalist party may stand for election in the north on a pro-separation, pro-secessionist basis, seize control of whatever parliament or government is established up there, and using their political mandate, twist the arm of the government in Nicosia to follow the Scottish path towards a unilateral referendum. Can you understand why I was disappointed nobody from the Cyprus High Commission came to my lecture in the autumn? And why there should have been representatives here from the Cyprus government? I don't know whether they are aware of these parallels. And I'd be interested to know afterwards whether they are actively considering this. Let's now turn to the substance. The substantive consequences of what is happening in Scotland. And I have to here refer to my paper. The debate has unfolded in the United Kingdom, and I will hopefully be contributing to that debate. The no camp is rallying around the Better Together slogan, which has been coined by Alistair Darling, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is a lawyer by profession. And they're very much advancing the view that both the Conservative and Labour and also, I must add, the Liberal Democrat parties in the United Kingdom are adopting, which is that the United Kingdom must stay together. Alex Salmond is pressing his campaign. The bookies, and I always read what the bookies say to work out what's going on in politics, the bookies suggest that there will be a no vote in the Scottish referendum. But there are maybe 18 months or so until the election. Who knows what will happen over the next 18 months. But whatever the outcome of the referendum is, there are reasons why the Republic of Cyprus should take an active interest. And let me identify 4 substantive reasons. The first reason is fairly straightforward. I'm going to give you a series of ifs here. If there is a referendum in the autumn of 2014, and if a majority of Scottish voters vote yes to independence, and if Scotland thereby breaks away from the United Kingdom, that will establish an extremely dangerous precedent which the Turkish Cypriot nationalists would be able to seize upon. The dangers would be even greater if Scotland broke away from the Union and managed to stay within the European Union with all of the benefits and also all of the disadvantages that that brings with it. Czechoslovakia split into two before the two constituent parts of that federation entered the European Union. The Republic of Cyprus entered the European Union as a de facto partitioned state. Slovenia was part of the Yugoslav Federation before it broke away, but it joined the European Union as an independent sovereign state in its own right. We have not yet, unless I'm mistaken, we have not yet seen a sovereign state within the European Union fragment into two sovereign states. But we could be seeing this chain of events taking place in the United Kingdom and also, of course, in Spain with regard to Catalonia. So there is a substantive danger here for the Republic of Cyprus if Alex Salmond has his way. Secondly, this is the second substantive point. If Scotland manages to break away and thereby partition the United Kingdom, there will not just be a territorial partition across the border. There will also be a maritime partition offshore and in airspace. Now, the relevance of the maritime dimension to the Republic of Cyprus is graphic if one considers the argument advanced by Alex Salmond. Alex Salmond claims, and I'm not saying he's right, Alex Salmond claims that if Scotland breaks away from the United Kingdom, there will be a partition of the territorial sea offshore, but more broadly there will be a partition of the continental shelf and the exclusive economic zone. And Alex Salmond claims that, I think he's right on that point, but Alex Salmond claims that if such a maritime partition took place, Scotland would be entitled to 90% of the offshore oil and gas installations and the offshore oil and gas reserves. You can see the relevance to Cyprus and why there should have been somebody here from the Cyprus government and why there should have been somebody from the Cyprus High Commission in December and why they should have picked up my article back in May 2011. This is, whether one agrees or disagrees with the bizonal bifederal model, bizonal bicommunal model, this is clearly of relevance to Cyprus because precedents will be set. Thirdly, this is intriguing. It's been mooted in certain academic and legal circles that if Scotland breaks away, this may have an adverse effect upon the defence and national security infrastructure of the United Kingdom. Remember that the United Kingdom has bases dotted around the United Kingdom, and these include the nuclear bases in Scotland. It has been mooted, that means suggested, that if Scotland broke away, as part of the agreements reached for Scotland to break away, the United Kingdom should retain sovereign base areas in certain parts of Scotland, such as Faslane, where the Royal Navy's Trident nuclear submarines are based. Now, this isn't the time to open up the question of the sovereign base areas, but I merely ask the Republic of Cyprus whether they want to see a second precedent set for the formation of British sovereign base areas. The sovereign base areas here are unique. There is no other place in the world which includes sovereign base areas, at least on this model. And as Bill Mallinson and others have pointed out, the sovereign base areas here may have a paper title to them, but they are rather like the Parthenon marbles in the British Museum. They are Elginist. In other words, there is a British title, but the title is morally, if not legally, dubious. And the Republic of Cyprus can presumably reserve its position on that point. But a card up the sleeve of anybody wanting to play the base card is that they are unique. But the uniqueness would be undermined if the United Kingdom retained sovereign base areas in Scotland post-independence. Now, as some of you know, my views on the SBAs is that they should be folded into the security apparatus of the Republic of Cyprus and used to protect the offshore infrastructure and the onshore infrastructure that is now going to be established with the natural gas project. That's by the by. My point is that if Scotland achieves independence, there could be British sovereign base areas established in Scotland, and that will establish a precedent which may adversely affect the Republic of Cyprus in relation to its legal and moral position. And fourthly, if Scotland secedes from the United Kingdom, the armed forces of the United Kingdom will be adversely affected. By tradition, the Scots have provided not just substantial numbers of armed forces, but highly skilled and highly dynamic armed forces. Remember, the United Kingdom is a guarantor power of the Republic of Cyprus. It hasn't honoured properly its moral and legal duties to the Republic of Cyprus, but who knows in the future what might occur. The Republic may be attacked by a regional Islamist regime and may have to call upon the United Kingdom to exercise its guarantee. And the United Kingdom may wish to exercise the guarantee because it would be in British national interest to exercise the guarantee, unlike in '74. Would the Republic of Cyprus wish to see a diminished, hollowed out United Kingdom with much smaller armed forces? Would they wish to see other countries call for the United Kingdom to be dislodged as a permanent member of the Security Council? Because the argument might be, well, we wanted the United Kingdom of Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland to be in the Security Council. You're no longer that United Kingdom. You're a small country. Why would you wish to stay on the Security Council? Now, that may have good or bad consequences for the United Kingdom. My point is, these are matters that ought to be considered by the Republic of Cyprus in Nicosia. And finally, if I may, there's one final point I want to make before I draw my conclusions. There is a very satisfactory and promising consequence of what has happened in Scotland for the Republic, and it takes us to our rule of law programme. And one can agree or disagree with what we heard earlier, but what we must all agree is that whatever occurs here in the Republic of Cyprus must be lawful, it must be fair, and it must be decisive. And those are the three concepts that this referendum process in relation to Scotland have been built around. Everybody in Scotland and in London agrees that this process and the substance following on from that process must be lawful, fair, and decisive. And whichever constitutional or international model is pursued in Cyprus must be built around those three concepts. The British government, through the Advocate General for Scotland, Lord Wallace QC, have made it absolutely clear that as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, it is a member of the European Union. The European Union is built on the rule of law, and the constitutional future and the possible territorial fragmentation of a European Union member state must be predicated on law. I'd like to read to you the comments of Lord Wallace QC as delivered in a lecture he gave at the University of Edinburgh last year. I have a transcript here. He gave the lecture on the 2nd of October 2012. As I read this, bear in mind he's clearly talking about Scotland, but he could equally be talking about Cyprus, whether we agree or disagree with what we heard earlier. This is as applicable to Cyprus as it is to Scotland. And let me therefore read to you what he said. The European project is a legal construct. The European Union constitutes a new legal order. And when we consider Scotland's place within that order, we have to consider it as a matter of international and EU law. And by the same token, one considers the future of the Turkish occupied area. One must consider it through the lens of international law and EU law, and I might add the constitutional law of the Republic of Cyprus. Lord Wallace QC adds, "It will simply not do to say that we can put the law aside in considering the future of the European Union. The institutions of the European Union arose from the ashes of a continent which had been shattered by the actions of governments who held the rule of law in contempt, who regarded rights and justice as affectations. So it is not surprising that law is at the core of the European project. Of course, there is a political aspect to the question of Scotland and the United Kingdom's role in that project, but we must first ask ourselves with as much objectivity as we can manage whether, in legal terms, an independent Scotland would be a member of the European Union." The point he's making there is that the constitutional future of a European Union member state must be built upon law within the framework of the European Union. Lord Wallace, I must add, is a Liberal Democrat peer within the coalition government, but he's a Scots lawyer, a Queen's Counsel, and his views accord with the views of the United Kingdom on this point. It makes no difference that he's a Liberal Democrat. He's also made one final point which I want to leave you with. Let's move on to the conclusion. I'll come back to that perhaps in the question and answer session. There's one other reason why the Republic of Cyprus needs to, one other thing that the Republic of Cyprus needs to consider. Should it say "Ochi," no, and thereby help to guarantee the enosis, the union between England and Scotland? And I would argue that the Republic of Cyprus must take an interest. It must take an interest for all of the reasons that I've outlined so far. And it must take an interest for one other reason. As a member of the European Union, the Scottish Nationalist Party is arguing that if Scotland breaks away, Scotland will remain within the European Union. Lord Wallace, the Advocate General, and Mr. Barroso, the President of the Commission, have claimed that if Scotland breaks away from the European Union, it must reapply to join the European Union. Alex Salmond is now backtracking and saying, well, we will renegotiate our maintenance within the European Union before we withdraw from the United Kingdom. This is bringing to mind the Schleswig-Holstein question. My point is that the Republic of Cyprus, sooner or later, may have to make a decision as to whether or not it endorses a Scottish application to join the European Union. There's an old English saying, prevention is better than cure. Rather than reach that point and see the formation of a precedent which will return to haunt the Republic, possibly in the future, I would suggest that whoever is the next president of the Republic should make a grand proclamation and say that, no, we're not going to put up with this. We are going to oppose the secession of Scotland from the United Kingdom. We are going to say no. We will believe in the territorial integrity of sovereign states within the European Union. We do not want to see a dangerous precedent established within the European Union. We want our guarantor power, if we're going to keep it as a guarantor power, to be strong and unified. And we do not want to see our fate tied to the hands of a country that has been partitioned, because we ourselves want to prevent partition from taking place. So I would close this discussion by advocating, even in these straitened financial times, the appointment of a special envoy by the Republic of Cyprus to the United Kingdom. And he should go and open an office in London and perhaps a branch in Edinburgh to monitor what is going on, to contribute to the discussions, to issue proclamations as and when necessary, to call upon the Prime Minister in London and the First Minister in Scotland to go and visit them, meet them, lend his good offices if necessary in the event of a dispute between Scotland and England, and try and ensure that the interests of the Republic of Cyprus are preserved, because the consequences of the partition of the United Kingdom would be too grave for anybody to want to consider. So I will close, ladies and gentlemen, with an interesting thought, if I may. Winston Churchill spent a sizable proportion of his lengthy parliamentary career as the Member of Parliament for Dundee. He was the Member of Parliament there from 1908 until 1922, so a historic year in the history of the Eastern Mediterranean. Churchill was therefore familiar with Scotland and, of course, as we know, familiar and particularly fond of fine Scotch whisky. However, Churchill was also a keen student of history, and he is said to have remarked that of all of the small nations of this earth, perhaps only the ancient Greeks surpassed the Scots in their contribution to mankind. Churchill was surely right. Think of David Hume, who is often identified with Socrates, Plato and Aristotle as among the leading lights of philosophy. Think of Adam Smith, Alexander Graham Bell and Sir Alexander Fleming, all of whom were Scottish. But I want to leave you with this thought from the Scottish philosopher David Hume. Nothing is more surprising than the easiness with which the many are governed by the few. I close on that note.